So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our sixth webinar as part of our new Keep Vermont Cool webinar series. Tonight, we've got action after 60 and really all ages with the wonderful Bill McKibben. So if this is your first virtual event with us, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. We are so incredibly excited for tonight's program, and I know you all are too. So we will get started in just a moment, but again, as we wait for folks to trickle in, please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know how you take action within your community. And the term action is incredibly broad, so it could mean volunteering for a local organization, spreading the word about an important issue, or making an individual change to your lifestyle. So think about that for just a moment and feel free to share what you do or would like to do in the chat, because you never know who you might inspire this evening. And with all of that said, we will quickly do some introductions and talk through the agenda, and please continue to type if you are doing so at the moment. Now, first, as always, I want to recognize the Abenaki Nation, whose traditional territory many of us are gathering on this evening. I want to acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land, which includes the lakes, the rivers, the forests, and so much more. So, moving on, I may have met some of you already, but for those who don't know, my name is Jordan Hayden. I use she, her pronouns, and I am BPIRG's Keep Vermont Cool campaign manager. I will talk a little bit about our climate campaign at the end of tonight's program, but for now, let me give you the full run-through of the agenda. In just a moment, we will get to the part that you're all most excited about, which is a conversation with Third Act and 350.org founder, Bill McKibben. He'll tell us a bit about his work within these organizations and perhaps about his brand new book, as well as how we can all take meaningful action within our own lives. And as always, we will leave plenty of time and space for a Q&A session at the end where you can ask Bill all of your burning questions. And you can feel free to plug those questions into the Q&A box at any point, and I will share them out loud when the time comes. Finally, in the last few minutes of our program, I will give a very short update on the Keep Vermont Cool campaign and how you can continue to get involved with this very important work. Now, Bill really needs no introduction, but I will give one anyway. Bill McKibben is a contributing writer to The New Yorker and a founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 to work on climate and racial justice. He also founded the first global grassroots climate campaign, 350.org, and serves as the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College in Vermont. In 2014, he was awarded the Right Livelihood Prize, sometimes called the Alternative Nobel, in the Swedish Parliament. He's also won the Gandhi Peace Award and honorary degrees from 19 colleges and universities. He's written over a dozen books about the environment, including his first, The End of Nature, published in 1989, and the forthcoming The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. So Bill, thank you again so much for being here. It is an honor to have you with us tonight. And with that, I will let you take it away.
Well, Jordan, many thanks. What a pleasure to be with you all. It seems the right day to be thinking about keeping Vermont cool because we've been very lucky this summer. Unlike the rest of the Northern Hemisphere, we haven't been sweltering, but today got a little too close to the line for me. It's about as hot as I ever like to see it. And so I'm very grateful that my old friend Allison Bechtel stopped by with Fiddlehead in the cooler today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just partake a little bit as we go on through this webinar today. I want to do just a few things here. One is to just bring people up to date on where we are globally and nationally on climate, and then talk about some of the work we're doing, in particular with old people like me. So let's begin with what's happening on planet Earth. This has been a remarkable stretch these last weeks across the planet. We didn't actually expect this to be a record globally hot year. We're in a La Nina cycle right now in the Pacific, and that generally cools the planet at least a little bit. All the record years of warmth that we've had have happened in El Nino years when the Pacific is particularly warm. And of course, they've gotten higher and higher because we're warming the baseline by pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But this year, despite the fact that it was a La Nina, June turned out to be the globally warmest June that we've ever measured. That's scary. What that implies is the next time we get an El Nino, the temperatures are going to be just absolutely through the roof. But they're bad enough, obviously, right now. In June and July, we've seen incredible heat waves across much of the planet. Actually, the action got underway in April and May across the subcontinent, across much of Asia, where they had record springtime temperatures, pre-monsoon temperatures across India, truly unbearable. Just day after day of extraordinary heat, but that heat has now migrated to the North China Plain, really to much of China. There have been heat emergencies across China day after day after day. And of course, now to Western Europe, we saw just unbelievable scenes in the last few days. The UK has the longest running temperature record on the planet. It's the place where people started measuring temperatures a couple of hundred, well, 300 years ago. And so that means that there are many tens of thousands of daily temperature records at each of these sites because they're every day. So what that means, if you think about it statistically, it means that it's very, very, very difficult to break a record at all. And if you're going to break a record, it's going to be by 1/10 of a degree, something like that, by a tiny margin. Instead, in England yesterday, they broke the old temperature record by 3 degrees Fahrenheit. That should be statistically impossible on the world that we live in. But the world we live in isn't the same world that those old temperature records were set in. We live on a different planet. And we can see this in place after place after place around the world. It was this time last year that a heat dome settled over the Pacific Northwest and all of a sudden, in Canada, and all of a sudden there were parts of Canada where the temperature reached 121 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hotter than it's ever been in, say, Florida. It's hotter than it's ever been in South America. It's hotter than it's ever been in Europe. It's hotter than it's been in Canada since the Pleistocene. Those kind of numbers are truly terrifying. I mean, I wrote the first book about climate change back in 1989, The End of Nature, long before Jordan et al. Were born. And we've known that this was coming. I mean, there was nothing surprising about it. It's precisely what we said was going to happen. But to actually see it happening is quite remarkable. So far, humans have raised the temperature of the planet 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. And that has been enough to, well, among other things, cause these great heat waves that we're seeing because those statistical averages hide enormous extremes. But it's also been enough to inaugurate extraordinary change around the planet. Since 1 degree Celsius doesn't sound like that much, think about it in other units. The extra heat that we trap near the planet every day because of the carbon we've put in the atmosphere is the heat equivalent of 400,000 Hiroshima-sized explosions. When you think about it in those terms, it's easier to understand how we've melted half the sea ice in the summer Arctic. It's easier to understand why sea levels have now begun this accelerating rise. It's easier to understand how we've managed to damage in profound ways the hydrological cycles of this planet. If you wanted one thing to kind of understand the 21st century, it's simply that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. And that means that in arid areas, you get more evaporation and more drought and more quickly forest fire. And it means that in wet areas like ours, you get more downpour. The number of storms that drop 2 inches of rain in a 24-hour period is up about 70% in our neck of the woods. And those are the storms that do nobody any good. Those are the ones that wash soil away. That's the reason that every DPW department in Vermont is busy switching out, 12-inch culverts for 14-inch culverts everywhere they are. It's a different world, and as we learned during Irene, a dangerous one for a place like Vermont, even for a place like Vermont. Because let's be honest, Vermont's doing better than almost any other place on Earth when we think about the effects of climate change. In general, the effects of climate change are visited most dramatically on the people who've done the least to cause them. That's the iron law of climate change, and it's truly distressing and depressing. Right now in the Horn of Africa, in places like Somalia, we're in the 5th straight rainy season with no rain. And so people are starving. Most of the livestock have long since died. People are now gathering in refugee camps and wherever they can to try and get some food. But of course, food's hard to come by right now because a series of droughts and heat waves has cut grain harvests around the world. Combine that with the fact that Vladimir Putin is blockading Ukraine's harvest for his own thuggish purposes, and it's easy to understand why this is going to be a very, very, very difficult year for an awful lot of people. I mean, we're worried about inflation here, but the price of grain, price of corn's gone up 40% for people who have to spend half their income to go to the market every day and buy some cornmeal to feed their family. That's the most important thing that's happened to them, and it's not their fault. People in Somalia, where this drought is at its deepest and worst, produce about 1/300th as much carbon each year as the average American. So we should remember that when we're starting to feel sorry for ourselves about all that's being asked of us to deal with climate change and so on. We've raised the temperature 1 degree. On current trajectories, we're headed for 3 degrees Celsius, 5-6 degrees Fahrenheit. If we do that, then we're not going to have civilizations like the ones we're used to on this planet. That's just too much chaos and violent, dramatic flux. Among other things, the UN estimates it creates between 1 and 3 billion climate refugees. The world's trying incredibly hard to cope with 4 million 4 million refugees coming out of Ukraine as a result of the war. Try multiplying that by 250 and then try to imagine what things look like on our planet. Nothing good. All the work that we're doing, that the wonderful people at VPIRG are doing, that people are doing across this climate movement around the world, is to try and keep that 3 degree number closer to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees if we really do all that we can. That's not going to be good. I mean, if 1 degree melts the Arctic, we're foolish to find out what 2 degrees is, but we're going to come close to finding out, even if we do everything right at this point, because we've waited so long to get started. Okay, enough bad news. I feel like I'm getting wound up and I don't want to go on and try your patience. Let me give you the good news now. The good news now is that we know what to do and we can afford to do it. The most important statistic from the last 10 years in the world of energy, and really maybe in the world of economics in general, is that the price of renewable energy has dropped 90%. Power from the sun, power from the wind, and the batteries to store that power when the sun goes down or the wind drops have dropped 90%. This is now the cheapest way to generate power on planet Earth. Thank you to the scientists and engineers who performed that miracle, and thank you to the entrepreneurs who have, made it possible by building out over and over and over again each new iteration of this technology. Each time we double the installation of solar power on this planet, the price drops another 30%. And I really want you to think about that for a minute, because I don't think we've completely internalized it. I think we're still used to thinking about alternative energy as more expensive and more cumbersome and more difficult, but it's not alternative energy anymore. It's just the smart way to do things. Um, you know, um, I, I, I don't think I ever completely understood just how amazing it was that we live in the moment we do until a few years ago when I took a reporting trip for the New Yorker to Africa. And I was off in very remote parts of Ghana and Ivory Coast watching them install solar power. This was the first power these places had ever gotten, and they were never going to get power from the grid. There's still 1 billion people on Earth without electricity, and at current rates of the expansion of the kind of conventional power grid, there'll be 1 billion people 20 years from now without power. But the price of solar energy is dropping enough that just as they were able to leapfrog sort of telephone technology and never needed to build phone poles and wires and things, now people are able to bring power to their village via solar power. And I remember being in a village that just the day before it had the power turned on for the first time. They'd put 40 solar panels at the edge of this village and rudimentary wiring hut to hut, and now people had electricity. And I was sitting there with the elders in this village, and it was in Ghana near the equator, so it was very hot. And as I've already said, I'm a Vermonter, so I do not tolerate heat well. So I was grateful when the elders, one of these guys kept handing me bottle after bottle of cold water to drink. I was very grateful. But in my clueless Western way, it took me a good 20 minutes to figure out why he was so proud to be handing me that. Until the day before, when those solar panels had gone up, there had never been a refrigerator in this place. No one had ever had anything. Cold wasn't really a thing that had existed there before. And just the idea that we live at a moment when the cheapest way to generate power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun is such a, that's Hogwarts scale magic. And if we had brains and or hearts, we'd be devoting all our energy to taking that miracle and expanding it all over the world. To bring people power, to slow down the climate crisis, to stop the public health crisis that is the burning of fossil fuel. We now know from a really big study last year, the first really global study, we now know that 9 million people a year are dying from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel, those particulates that are formed when coal or gas or oil gets burned. 9 million's a lot. That makes it the second or third leading cause of death on the planet. It's more than COVID. It's more than HIV, AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, war, and terrorism combined. And it's completely unnecessary because we do not need to be doing this anymore. In fact, I wrote a long piece for the New Yorker earlier this year saying, we really live at the moment when it's possible to imagine that the 200,000-year human career of setting stuff on fire could come to an end. We don't need to be burning things anymore. We now could rely on the fact that the good Lord was kind enough to hang a big ball of burning gas 93 million miles away in the sky, and we have the wit to make full use of it. We can capture its rays on photovoltaic panels. People like David Blittersdorf can take advantage of the fact that that sun differentially heats the planet, and therefore we have wind that blows between the areas of high pressure and low pressure, and we can capture that and make use of it. And those are extraordinary gifts. It's amazing to imagine. And this year, I'll just add, we were reminded in very stark terms of one more reason why it would be nice to get off fossil fuel. Vladimir Putin gets 60% of his earnings from oil and gas. That's what Russia does. Used his wealth to invade Ukraine. Fossil fuel and autocracy go together all too well, as you can tell by looking at the King of Saudi Arabia or by looking at the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons, who used their winnings to purchase one of our political parties and degrade our democracy. It'll be nice to, when we get to the place where we rely on a technology. Look, Vladimir Putin can't interdict the sun. The King of Saudi Arabia cuts people's heads off with a sword, but he can't cut off the wind. That's a different and much more humane way of getting energy. Which is not to say it's perfect. There are problems that come with it. We have to figure out how to mine lithium and cobalt in ways that don't do damage to the environment or to the people mining it. And people are at work on that. The thing to remember when you think about stuff like that is that if we manage to move to renewable energy, the best estimate is the total amount of mining on the planet would drop about 80%. And the reason for that, if you think about it, is simple. You mine lithium once to build your battery or your solar panel or whatever, and then that solar panel sits there and for a quarter century, and the energy gets delivered every day when the sun rises above the horizon. Coal, you have to dig up, burn, and then dig up again every single day over and over and over again. A way to think about this that really struck me when I came across this statistic this year is that 40% of all the ship traffic on the high seas, 4 ships out of 10, are simply carrying coal and gas and oil back and forth across the planet to burn. We don't need that anymore. We can run this world on electricity from the sun and the wind. We can run it through electric vehicles. We can run it through air source heat pumps. We can run it through magnetic induction cooktops. There's no need to have flame anymore. Yeah, I mean, look, there's still need for your campfire. There's still need for the candles and the birthday cake. But other than that, we can douse the flames that we've had burning for 200,000 years. So, given the fact that we have the biggest problem we've ever faced, and given the fact that we have a solution to it, the interesting question is, why are we not adopting that solution at extraordinary speed? Why are we not in an all-out effort to do this? And the answer to that, of course, is twofold. One's inertia. We're used to things the way they are, and change is hard. That's been a problem in Vermont. Let's be honest about it. I mean, the state panel that approved such things earlier this year rejected a 10-acre solar farm in Vermont simply on aesthetic grounds. People said, we don't want to look at it, and they said, okay. And basically, that's the reason that we've had a de facto moratorium on wind power in Vermont. People don't want to look at it. I get that. I understand it. Though I've come to think that the sight of a big wind turbine spinning in the breeze is kind of beautiful, I must say. But at any rate, we can't afford that inertia. We are in an emergency, something I'll get to in a minute. The other reason, even deeper, is the way that vested interest has managed to game our political system here and around the world to keep us from making change at the pace we need. We now know from great investigative reporting that the fossil fuel industry knew all about climate change in the 1980s. Look, Exxon was the biggest company on earth. They had great staff of scientists. Their product was carbon. Of course they were going to study it, and they found out everything they need to know. Their scientists told their executives what the temperature was going to be in 2020, and they were spot on. Not only that, the executives believed them. Exxon started building all its drilling rigs higher to compensate for the rise in sea level they knew was coming. They began charting out just what parts of the Arctic they wanted to go drill in once they'd melted it. What they didn't do was tell the rest of us. Instead, across this industry, they built this vast architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that kept us locked for 30 years in this completely sterile debate about whether or not global warming was real. A debate that, remember, both sides knew the answer to at the beginning. It's just one of them was willing to lie. And that lie turned out to be the most consequential lie in human history, because it's cost us the thing we most desperately need, which is time. Instead of having 40 years to deal with this crisis, we now have 6 or 7. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has told us we need to cut emissions in half by 2030 if we want to have a chance of meeting those targets we set in Paris. So that's why, some years ago, we started building movements to try and counter that power of the fossil fuel industry. And a good amount of this work, it must be said, happened in Vermont. Well, some of you on this call, I have no doubt, were around when we did in 2006 that march up the western side of Vermont for 5 days to Burlington. It was really quite wonderful. By the time we got to Burlington, there were 1,000 of us marching. Which, when I tell that to people in the rest of the country, they're like, "Well, that's not so many." But of course, in Vermont, 1,000 people is a lot of except for Thunder Road. That's about as many people as gather in one place at any given time. So what was scary was to read the story in the Free Press the next morning, and that was back when the Free Press still had stories in it. And they said that 1,000 people that gathered in Burlington was probably the biggest demonstration about climate change that had yet taken place in America. That was 2006. No wonder we were losing. We didn't have a movement. We had Al Gore, we had scientists, we had policy people. We just had forgotten the movement part. So we started trying to build one. 350.org was the first iteration of this kind of movement. Started at Middlebury. I worked with 7 college students there. Because it was an unfilled ecological niche, we had good luck. We've gone on to hold 20,000 demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea. Spearheaded this fight against the Keystone Pipeline, which became the first big defeat for big oil. Launched this fossil fuel divestment campaign that's now at $40 trillion in endowments and portfolios that have divested from fossil fuel, including all the colleges in Vermont, but not including the Vermont pension funds. I'm happy to see that the treasurer of Vermont is retiring in this year's election cycle, because it means that perhaps her intransigence on this issue will fade, and the new treasurer will do what New York and Quebec and a lot of our neighbors have done, and divest the portfolio from fossil fuel, which would be a big help. At any rate, it was wonderful to watch all that work go on. And most of it was done by young people. That's who started 350.org with me. And then those college kids who did all that work on divestment, when they graduated, they wanted to get going, keep going. And so they formed the Sunrise Movement. And that's where we got the Green New Deal and this Build Back Better bill that Joe Manchin has put the kibosh on. And of course, the really young people. You all know Greta Thunberg, and you should. She's one of my favorite people to work with. I really adore her. I think she's amazing. She'd be the first to tell you that there are 10,000 Gretas around the planet, and they have 10 million followers. That's how many kids were out on school strike in September of 2019 before the pandemic struck. So that's great. But I began to get a little worried that I heard too many people saying, well, it's up to the next generation to take care of these problems. The young people will, whatever. And of course, the young people are doing a great job. Look who's hosting this call tonight, But it is not okay to take the deepest problems the planet's ever faced and assign them to 17-year-olds to solve. To say, look, between, Spanish homework and field hockey practice, would you mind also saving the planet for us? That's ignoble, and it's also impractical, because for all the intelligence and energy and idealism that young people bring to this fight, they lack the structural power to make the changes that we need to make. We can only do this work if we work across generations, and I think particularly it's time for people of an older generation to really rise up and do this work. That's why we started Third Act a few months ago, and why it really makes me happy how well it's going. There are 70 million people over the age of 60 in the US. That's bigger than the population of France. Not only are there a lot of us, we punch above our weight politically because we vote like crazy. There is no known way to prevent old people from voting. And we ended up with most of the money. 70% of the country's financial resources belong to the baby boomers or the silent generation, compared with about 5% for millennials. So if you wanted to go after Washington or Wall Street, then it'd be a good idea to get some people with hairlines like mine engaged in this fight. And the conventional reason that people haven't tried to do this organizing is because they've believed the standard assumption, which is that people become more conservative as they age. There's some truth to that, at least statistically. Maybe people have more to protect, but we can't let it be true. And I think with these generations, we don't need to let it be true. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, then your first act came at this time of extraordinary social and cultural and political transformation. What do I mean? Think about those Supreme Court decisions over the last month, all of them gross, on guns, on choice, on voting rights, on clean air and the EPA. They're all attacking things that happened in a relatively short period of time between, say, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and Roe v. Wade in 1973, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the Clean Air Act of 1971, the formation of the EPA. This was a remarkable period of time that we were around to participate in or bear witness to. Now, I don't mind when the young people go on about okay boomer and things, because look, in our second act, with plenty of notable exceptions, we were more interested in consumerism than we were in citizenship. But that water's under the bridge, and now we emerge in our third act with lots of skills, lots of resources, some time, and often kids or grandkids to take that abstract concept of legacy and give it a very concrete form. Your legacy is the world you leave behind for the people you care about the most. And the world that we're leaving behind is shabbier than the one we inherited. And that's a very bad thing to think about. So, third act is premised on the idea that if we won these fights once, we can win them again. And we're hard at work. The idea has gone over very big. Tens of thousands of people have signed up. There's a good chapter underway in Vermont. And it's been effective. Even our early campaigns have begun to have some success. One of the first things we took on right after the invasion of Ukraine was calling on the president to invoke the Defense Production Act so that we could start building heat pumps in large numbers, either to ship to Europe or to use in this country, to cut the demand for fossil fuel. Because every time we put up an air source heat pump and replace the oil or gas burner in the basement with this machine that can miraculously take the ambient heat in the air outside and use it to heat or cool your home, every time we do one of those, well, it lessens Putin's leverage a little bit more because he depends on people being dependent on fossil fuel. So we started hard work on that campaign, and within 100 days have convinced the White House to invoke the Defense Production Act. Now we're working hard. We just sent out an alert today, trying to get Joe Biden to declare an official climate emergency in this country and move hard to, since Joe Manchin won't collaborate on the important work of Build Back Better, he's going to have to do it by executive action, and we're pushing hard for that. Our biggest campaign around climate, however, is to go after the big banks. The banks that lend, Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, the four biggest American banks, are also the four biggest lenders to the fossil fuel industry. They're head and shoulders above everybody else. They sent huge amounts of money, more than $1 trillion since the Paris Climate Accords were signed. They didn't need Donald Trump to sabotage them. They were willing to do it themselves, eager to do it, in hope of a little profit. So we're doing our best to take them on. People are signing this pledge, banking on the future, that they will cut up their credit cards from these guys at year's end. And then we'll move on to do the work we've done. We'll organize college campuses to stop banking with them, and we'll organize state treasurers and things to stop helping them, stop banking with them, and put what pressure we can on them. Because truthfully, Washington's not working all that well anymore. It's a pretty dysfunctional political system. So while we're working on that, we might as well be working also on the other lever big enough to matter, the one marked money or finance. It's been lots of fun to do that, and people are doing it in just the right spirit. There was a big demonstration that Third Act Vermont did not too long ago outside the Chase Bank up in Burlington. And it was lots of fun because tons of kids from the high school heard about it, and it turned out high school kids were a little sprier. They were at the front of the march, but there was a bunch of older people, and they had a big sign that said, "Fossils against fossil fuels." So, that's the spirit in which we do this, and it's potentially really powerful, I think. If we can get older people to think of themselves in a different way, to redefine how they imagine what their role in the world can be, then we can make real change. I confess I first sort of cottoned onto this idea when we were 11 years ago, when we launched the fight against the Keystone Pipeline. And I wrote the letter that asked people to come to Washington to engage in civil disobedience. And indeed, it became the biggest civil disobedience action about anything in this country in many years. And I won't forget, by the way, the fact that 2 or 3 days after Irene, a busload of Vermonters pulled up ready to go to jail, saying, "Look, you couldn't prevent Irene, but we try to stop the next one." At any rate, when I wrote that letter, I said, I don't think that young people should have to be the cannon fodder. They're leading this fight. But if you're 19, it's possible an arrest record's not the single best thing for your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? So, when people showed up, we didn't say, when they were getting arrested, we didn't ask them how old they were. That seemed rude. But we did say, cleverly I think, who was president when you were born. And the two biggest cohorts came from the FDR and the Truman administrations. On the last day, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said World War II vet handle with care. He was old enough that he'd been born during the Warren Harding administration, which was long enough ago I'd forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. Look, the best thing about that was that the young people who were there got to see their elders act in the way that we need elders to act in this way. And it was quite beautiful. And it's been quite beautiful to watch it unfold as we've started down this third act work, among other things. Many of the great cultural icons of our first act are still alive and still eager to help. Jordan, you can fight me if you want, but our generation did produce the greatest music of all time. And so it's been great fun to have Carole King and Bette Midler and Patti Smith and Neil Young and just last week on our national call, Mandy Patinkin, and on and on and on, joining in this fight. And we'll see how it goes. I'm not going to make any promises. We're behind. There's no question that we're behind, that we're losing the most important battle the world's ever had. But it's not, the thing that makes it so crazy is that it's not at all difficult to see what we need to do. We have the technology to do differently. We can afford the technology. In fact, it'll save us money in all kinds of ways to deploy it. We just have to get off the dime. And that's why I'm grateful to be for doing this kind of work, and to everybody here, because I know that everybody on this call has been engaged in this work already. And I couldn't be more grateful for it. And I couldn't be prouder of the role that Vermont played in building this global movement. But Vermont has lagged in its own work, getting its own house in order. It's lagged on divestment, which you can tell rankles me no end. And it's lagged on deployment of renewable technology. I kind of rankled me too when they said that solar farm couldn't be built because it wasn't pretty enough. We've got to start thinking differently about how we view the world. I get that we're used to a certain way of looking at things, but right now, the Champlain Valley, where I live, it's covered with solar collectors of a different kind. We call them corn, but those are just solar collectors. And in order to make those solar collectors work, you have to put a huge amount of nitrogen on the ground, and it all washes down into Lake Champlain, and that's why we get algae blooms. And truthfully, we don't really need anywhere near as much of the crop that we're producing, milk from all that corn. We've got more than enough. But we do need that crop of electrons because we use a ton of them. And so it's time for us to think differently. And it's possible to do it. And it will be led by young people. But the rest of us need to figure out how we're going to back them up. So I'm going to stop there. I've rattled on way too long already. But many, many thanks. It's the problem for letting old people talk. Once they get going, they get going. But it's a real pleasure to be with you all. And if there's got questions or comments or critique or abuse or anything, then now's the time. Fire away.
Thank you so much, Bill. This was really, truly inspiring and just, I don't know, wonderful. And I'm sure our audience does have a lot that they would like to say or ask, so we can transition now into our Q&A portion. And I will just go back to screen sharing. So just hold on for one moment. All right. So let me pull up some of our questions and we can get started right away. All right, first up, we have Bill. Thanks for your support for wind and solar in Vermont. We need a modern grid with in-state wind, solar, and hydro sources for an integrated electric supply. How do we get back on track to build the renewables that we need?
Look, my sense of the world is that political systems only work when people push them. That left to their own devices, the status quo always prevails. And so we need to organize. That's what Third Act Vermont's doing. It's what 350 Vermont's doing. It's what VPIRG's doing. We need to be pushing, and we need to make sure that our elected officials understand what we want from them. It kind of was easier to just back off on things like wind for a while because they got more flack from people who didn't want to look at it than they did support from people who understood that it was necessary. But it's time for us to just be saying, guys, come on. This is the world we live in, and we've got to get it right fast.
Thank you. All right, our next question. I'm really concerned by the lack of recycling across the country. How can we get other states to get on the recycling bandwagon? I'm assuming that this is a part of the climate problem.
Yeah, it may be a part of the climate problem. It's not a central part of the climate problem, but it is a reminder of just how crazy it is, how slow change comes. We've known how to recycle things for a long time. And so, the reasons we don't do it are all obvious, but I'm really glad that Vermont continues to push hard. And I'm glad that we're doing this work around, say, at this point, recycling food waste and composting it and things like that. This is important work. It's not the absolute center of the climate fight, and that's the most existential crisis that we face. But it's not the only problem that we face, and there's lots of other environmental work to be done too. But I will say that the transition off coal and gas and oil, the replacement with renewable energy, really is planetary job one. Because if we don't get that right, then everything else is going to be moot and pretty fast.
Absolutely. Thank you. Our next question, how can we get every house to get solar panels?
Well, you need to provide the subsidy, to make it possible for people to do that. And because not everybody can afford it. Um, Basically, that means allowing people to, the financing to let them pay it back over time. Because once you put it up, your energy bills drop pretty dramatically. I got to say that Green Mountain Power, at least in the past, has been pretty good about some of this. And so, we should be working through Efficiency Vermont and through some of these other established channels just to make sure that that can happen. And that requires, among other things, some of the money that was in that Build Back Better bill that Joe Manchin has blocked. And it's one of the reasons why that failure is so depressing, and why we need to push hard now on the president to try and get him to use executive authority however he can.
Next question. It must be really scary to experience this drastic climate transition firsthand. What are some easy ways for people to adjust their habits to help the cause?
Well, I mean, at this point, people know much of what they need to do as individuals, and I'm guessing most people on this call have done it. I mean, eat lower on the food chain, bike, and when you can, drive an electric vehicle. E-bike would be the best of all the electric vehicles, but drive, power what you can, so on and so forth. But I really do think it's important to say that we're not going to make the math of climate change square one Tesla at a time. We've waited too long for that to be our strategy. The most important thing an individual can do is be less of an individual and join together with others in groups large enough to make that happen, large enough to push for changes in the basic political and economic ground rules, because that's what we need. And that's why VPIRG is so important. They have a long record of doing that. And many, many thanks to everyone who's engaged in that work and everyone who supports them when VPIRG comes and, knocks on your door at some point in the year.
And that canvassing is happening now. So if you've seen them, say hello. Great, thank you so much. Next question. Citizens with disabilities need support, tools, and resources to help with the everlasting changing and climate crisis within Vermont and around the United States. Knowing this, how can we move forward together with solutions, innovations, and accessibility tools and resources for the coming future of Vermont and the US?
That's right. There's all kinds of groups that really need particular attention. People with disabilities, children, older people, people who, when we have climate crises, when we have floods or fires or things, are particularly threatened. And that's one of the reasons why it's been really good to see that as people have proposed legislation, an increasing amount of that money and things is directed at vulnerable communities. In that Build Back Better bill, which Joe Manchin has apparently torpedoed, there was a real emphasis on the most vulnerable communities and people around the country. And that's something that should continue because, as I said, the basic rule of climate change is the less you do to cause it, the sooner and the harder you get hit. That's definitely true around the world. I mean, the comparison with Somalia, Honduras, or Bangladesh and how much carbon they produce is savage and horrible to contemplate. But it's true within our own country too. The richer and the richer you are, the more carbon you produce. That said, one of the things to remember is how easy it is for people with means to make changes that count. It turns out that if you have $125,000 in the bank, and it's in the sort of conventional banking system in this country, it's producing more carbon than all the cooking, heating, flying, driving, cooling that the average American does in a year, because they're taking that money and lending it out to Exxon to build more pipelines with. So people of means can play a particular role here in making this change happen. Move your money, but don't do it by yourself, because unless you're incredibly rich, it's likely that Chase or Citi or whoever might not notice that you left. That's why we're joining everybody together at year's end for this big Scissors Day, where we're going to cut up credit cards all over America. And it's going to be fun and powerful, and a kind of prelude to the next parts of these campaigns.
Awesome. That sounds like a great event. Next question. With many politicians having loyalties to companies who fuel their campaigns and other factors, do you think we'll ever get to a place in which our government and policy decision makers will acknowledge that we're in a climate emergency?
We're getting way closer. We've had 3 big attempts, one in the 1990s, one in 2009, and now Build Back Better in Congress to address the climate crisis. All 3 have failed, but this last one only failed by a vote. And the reason it got that close was because of the great organizing that people did. During the last Democratic primary, climate change had become the #1 issue for voters. That's why Joe Biden was so outspoken about it. He had no particular record of being concerned about the climate, but he understood it to be a winning issue. And the only reason it's a winning issue is because of the work that people have done. So if we keep organizing, we will win that fight. The thing that worries me is this is a time test, and if we don't win it soon, then that's, we can't wait another decade for the next one of these showdowns. We need it to happen sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next question. What are some concrete ideas of what seniors can do to act now?
So join us at Third Act, take this banking pledge, and then start getting other people to take it. One of the good things about older people is we grew up, in a world where face-to-face communication was, a skill that we acquired. So we still know lots of people, and you got to get out and get other people to do this same kind of thing. Take this pledge, join in. That's what organizing is. It's just finding other people and bringing them on side, getting them engaged in the fight. So that's the thing that older people can do, and you've got plenty of time to do it, perhaps all day, and you know how to do it. You know how to talk to people, you know how to write to people, you know how to bring people on board. But join us at Third Act, and Third Act Vermont is really going great guns as a chapter.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, next question. Your slogan is "Our time is now." I feel that this is our last chance and that we have squandered much of our time. Any thoughts on modifying?
It's plenty of good slogans that one could have, but I do think our time is now. It's fine to say it's our last chance too. Those don't seem contradictory to me at all. So carry whatever sign you want. Just show up at the demonstration. That's the point.
Thank you. I've met with Efficiency Vermont via video conferencing during the peak of the pandemic. I inquired about heat pumps versus my current propane furnace. They shrugged it off and didn't really answer. I've been researching this since as an option, and it seems to me that we should be promoting this changeover to heat pumps pretty vigorously. Is that right, or am I misinformed?
I think you're just right. I mean, I wrote a big column that got spread all over called Heat Pumps for Peace and Freedom after the Ukraine invasion, and it ended up, that was, according to the Washington Post, it was what the Biden administration was reading when they invoked the Defense Production Act. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a miracle technology, and I'm surprised to hear that Efficiency Vermont wasn't interested, because I think in the past they've been working hard on these lines. So you might just have hit the wrong person. I think I'd try again.
Thank you. All right, next up. Beside writing letters and protesting in the streets on one end of the spectrum and violent disruptions of the status quo, big money, business, politics on the other end, what are some particular things that we as activist groups can do to bring about those climate or political changes that are so desperately needed? Not the individual choices or the interactions with politicians and elected officials, but the concrete things that groups can bring physically and systemically for change. Maybe an unclear question, but everything else seems...
The question makes sense. There's a million things that can be going on, but I'll tell you the first thing that should happen in Vermont. We're going to have a new treasurer, after this election, and everybody should be on that new treasurer. I think his name is likely to be this guy, Mike Pisciak. Um, everybody should divest from fossil fuels, sell off the fossil fuel holdings in the state pension fund. It is time. Among other things, it cost our pension fund a lot of money in the last decade because these were the worst performing stocks that there were. But more to the point, it's just absurd. Like, why are we trying to prepare for the future, which is what a pension is, by creating a planet on which there is no future? It's just dumb, and it's why much savvier investors than the treasurer of Vermont have decided to get rid of fossil fuels. So that's a very concrete thing that we could do in Vermont quickly. It would really help, and it shouldn't take too much effort. And get on it, because if for no other reason, I am so tired of talking about it. And it's also slightly embarrassing to be from Vermont when we can't do that thing that even our neighbors across the state line in New York have managed to do. Come on.
Thank you. All right, I'd say we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. So how about this one? Affordability is key for most Vermonters. We would love our next car to be electric, but they are expensive. We're thinking about e-bikes for shopping, but not in winter. Would frequent local electric mass transit options become an option?
Yeah, e-buses are good, especially in the places where we can make them work. And that makes sense. But I will say that the price of electric vehicles, if you need a car, is coming down and coming down fast. And I drive a Kia Niro EV that I paid, I'm going to say 36,000 for, which is less than the price of the average new car in this country, and it works great. At the moment, they're all a little hard to come by because so many people want them. But give it 6 months, and look. I shouldn't say this because it sounds like I'm gloating, but it's awfully nice to not have to worry about the fact that gas is $5 a gallon. I don't even notice because I haven't been to a gas station in a long time. I just plug them into the solar panels on my roof,
That's my personal goal. I would love an EV. All right. How do we respond to the push to build lots of houses, even though they use massive amounts of fossil fuels to build and maintain, and that they continue dangerous growth and consumption levels?
I think that we need more housing, but I think it needs to be dense. I think we should be building out our town centers across Vermont. I think it's nutty that we're not. We clearly need more housing because it's too expensive for young people to live in this state. I have no idea how young people are even managing to find a place to stay. And that's crazy. We need young people. We probably need young people more than we need old people. So we should be building more housing, but we should be building it sensibly. Dense, in the center of cities, access to mass transit, all of that. So I got to say, I'm all for more housing, more affordable housing, more dense housing in our villages. Vermont is a great collection of villages and small towns, and the centers of those towns and villages are the places that we should be revivifying all we can, and that'll bring back local economies of all kinds. And I'd love to see it where it happens.
Thank you. Alrighty, and I will close this out with this question just because we do have a few more slides and I don't want to take up too much of anyone's time. But what are some resources to get more educated about current climate trends? Like you mentioning it being La Nina year, but it also being very warm.
Well, you could always, I don't mean to be vain, but I know as much about this as anybody else. So you could follow my Twitter feed, and it has a pretty good sort of constant sense of what's going on. And you could, I write a newsletter every week that's for free called The Crucial Years, and I write a lot for the New Yorker. So, or you could follow Michael Mann or Catherine Hayhoe, or there's 7 or 8 good climate educators around this country who just will sort of keep you up to date. But truthfully, you know what you need to know. Coal, oil, gas, bad. Sun, wind, batteries, good. That's the bottom line here. And the even bottom line is we got to do it fast. Winning slowly on climate change is just a different way of losing. So the job is to make things happen at a pace that catches up with the dire physics that we're confronting. Jordan, thank you so much for this. This has been a great evening for me, and let's do what we can to keep Vermont cool in all the usages of that word cool. You know, I raise my second fiddle IPA in your direction and say extraordinary thanks for all the work that VPIRG is doing and all the work that David Blittersdorf and Gita Coleman and everybody else on this call is doing. Many thanks to everybody. Let's figure out how to bring it home.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was really insightful. I know I learned so much. I'm sure the audience did as well. And again, just so appreciate you being here, taking the time. We know you're very busy and doing incredible work. So again, thank you times a million. This has just been so wonderful. Now, before you all head out, I would love to quickly wrap up with just a few updates on our campaign to keep Vermont cool. We have lots of opportunities for folks to take action with us. So, in case you haven't heard, Keep Vermont Cool aims to activate Vermonters and elected officials all around the state to take meaningful climate action so we can protect the beautiful Green Mountain state that we all know and love. So far, 11,000 Vermonters have joined our campaign, which is incredible, and we're hoping to double that number by the upcoming election. Right now, we're in the midst of running one of our largest digital campaigns in VPIRG history, and I know there was a question about this. VPIRG stands for the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, so I'm sorry for not saying that sooner. But we are currently conducting outreach to educate, engage, and inspire Vermonters to join the movement, starting with our digital petition. We're hosting various events throughout the year, like this one, to invite more Vermonters and Vermont voters to get involved, from advocacy days and rallies to fun outdoor activities and tabling sessions. Right now, we're tying those pieces together with VPIRG's Summer Canvas. Folks are out knocking on doors literally right now, talking to Vermonters about climate change at their doorsteps. Some of you may have already seen them. And we've also recently introduced our brand new Keep Vermont Cool Street team, which is a small but mighty team working to cover even more ground at various tabling events throughout the state. So here is how you can get involved. If you haven't already, you can start by signing our petition and pledge for climate action on our website, keepvermontcool.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Keep Vermont Cool to learn about upcoming events and opportunities. You can share your climate story or write an op-ed to help inspire other Vermonters. And you can check out our merch shop where we're selling locally sourced 100% organic cotton hoodies, t-shirts, and hats. And last but certainly not least, you can and absolutely should vote for climate leaders during the upcoming election. The Vermont primary is taking place Tuesday, August 9th, but you can vote early, either by mail or in person. You can check your registration status, request a mail-in ballot, review a sample ballot of the candidates, and find your polling location, plus so much more at mvp.vermont.gov. I believe someone will be posting that link in the chat. And finally, here are my contact details for anyone who would like to connect offline. I'm always happy and eager to chat, collaborate, or answer any questions about the campaign. So that concludes our event for this evening. And again, thank you all so much for being here. Bill, again, such an amazing presentation. We're very grateful for this work that you're doing. I hope you all have a wonderful night, and I can't wait to see how you all take action. Take care.